Welcome to this explainer. Okay, picture this. You walk into a room and suddenly, squish. You're stepping on soaking wet carpet. Or maybe you hear that dreaded drip, drip, drip coming from the ceiling. If you've been there, you know that water damage feels like absolute chaos. It feels completely unpredictable, overwhelming, and frankly, super destructive. But what if I told you that overcoming it isn't about chaos at all? It's actually a highly predictable, incredibly precise scientific process. Today, we're going to demystify exactly how professional restoration works and show you how to transform a really stressful disaster into a totally manageable step-by-step formula.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at Liberty's specific water damage threats. Second, we'll get into the actual science of drying. Third, we break down the three-step restoration process. And finally, we'll tackle the big ones: timelines, costs, and insurance.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Liberty's water damage threats, from historic homes to heavy storms. So, Liberty, Missouri actually provides a really fascinating look at how geography and architecture can combine to create basically a perfect storm for water intrusion. The area sits right in Clay County, and true to its name, it has extremely clay-heavy soil. Fun fact, clay soil expands immensely when it gets wet, so it acts less like dirt and more like a massive waterlogged sponge just constantly pressing against your foundation. This soil drains really poorly, meaning water just pools up and seeps right into basements. Add to that the very real threat of flash flooding near Watkins Mill Creek and the Little Fishing River during severe spring storms, and you've got constant exterior pressure. But the threats are internal too. Liberty features these beautiful historic homes near the downtown square, but they were built way before modern waterproofing standards. So during winter freeze-thaw cycles, those vulnerable, aging pipes frequently burst. Whether it's a modern subdivision or historic downtown build, the environment is just constantly testing the structure. And here's the thing, when water does breach those defenses, the clock starts ticking immediately. 24 to 48, that is the exact number of hours it takes for mold colonies to establish themselves in wet drywall, insulation, and wooden structures in a humid climate like Missouri's. You don't have days to figure out a game plan. You literally have hours before a simple water intrusion turns into a massive, super hazardous mold remediation project. Which brings us right to Section 2, the science of drying, and why professional mitigation beats amateur cleanup every time. Now, what's really interesting about this is that before a professional even touches a single drop of water, they have to classify the threat. It's strictly governed by the ICRC, that's the Institute of Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification. Category 1 is clean water, like what you'd get from a burst supply line. Initially, it's relatively low risk to your health. But Category 2 is gray water. Think along the lines of a washing machine overflowing. That carries moderate risks and definitely has some contaminants. And then there is Category 3, black water. This is the bad stuff. It comes from sewage backups or storm flooding, and it carries severe health risks. It mandates entirely different, highly specialized safety protocols, containment, and disposal methods. You absolutely cannot treat a Category 3 flood with Category 1 methods. Okay, so once the water is classified and extracted, the real magic happens. It's all based on a field called psychrometry. Structural drying isn't just mopping up a puddle, right? It's literally mathematically manipulating the air to pull hidden moisture out of solid materials. By measuring the temperature, relative humidity, and moisture content, professionals can calculate vapor pressure. They intentionally create this highly specific airflow and dehumidification environment that forces water trapped inside your drywall and wood to evaporate into the air, where it can then be permanently removed. To achieve that kind of scientific manipulation, you're going to need some heavy-duty gear. We're talking truck-mounted extractors that can suck up gallons of standing water in just minutes. We're talking thermal imaging cameras that literally allow technicians to see invisible moisture trapped right behind your walls. Add in industrial dehumidifiers, thermohygrometers to track the exact drawing progress, and EPA-registered antimicrobial treatments to stop that 24 to 48-hour mold clock we talked about earlier. This is exactly why throwing a rusty box fan at a flooded basement and just crossing your fingers simply doesn't work. The science requires the right instruments. Moving right along to Section 3, the three-step restoration process, or as I like to call it, structuring the chaos. Let's see how this builds. When disaster strikes, the professional response follows a super rigid, proven workflow. Step 1 is immediate dispatch. Step 2 is the extraction and scientific drying phase.
And step 3 is the final restoration and repair. This linear progression is exactly what turns a panicked emergency into a completely predictable, manageable project.
And honestly, that first step has to be lightning fast. In our Liberty case study, emergency crews are dispatched within 60 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Remember, water damage gets worse by the minute. A fast response allows technicians to stop the source of the water, begin extraction immediately, and prevent massive secondary damage from spreading to the totally unaffected areas of the building. Now, this brings us to a huge point of confusion in the industry that we really need to clear up right now. There is a massive difference between restoration and repair. Restoration is the emergency mitigation, the extraction, the scientific drying, the sanitization. Repair, on the other hand, is the reconstruction phase, putting up new drywall, installing fresh flooring, rebuilding cabinets. You absolutely must finish the restoration and complete the structural drying before you can safely begin the repair phase. If you rush to install new cabinets over a wall cavity that is still damp, you are simply trapping moisture and basically guaranteeing a future mold infestation.
All right, on to our final section, Section 4, Timelines, Costs, and Insurance, answering your biggest questions.
Because let's be real, this is the single most pressing question on every property owner's mind when they're standing ankle deep in water in their living room. Will my insurance actually pay for this? Well, the answer's a bit nuanced. Generally speaking, yes. Homeowners insurance covers sudden and accidental damage. Think a burst pipe in the winter or a tree smashing through your roof during a big storm. But they typically will not cover gradual damage caused by neglect or a slow leak that you ignored for months. Also, a really critical note for areas prone to flash floods: flood water from rising rivers or creeks almost always requires a completely separate FEMA flood insurance policy. Here's a massive pro tip, though. Certified restoration professionals actually act as your advocate. They map the moisture, keep daily scientific logs of the drying progress, and they often bill the carriers directly, providing the exact proof the adjusters need to approve your claim. Okay, so the next big question: how long does this all take? When can I get my life or my business back to normal? 3 to 7. For most standard water damage events, the scientific drying process takes between 3 to 7 days of continuous monitoring and equipment runtime. Now, obviously, if you have a massive structural flood or Category 3 black water that requires heavy demolition, that timeline can extend to 2 weeks or more. But 3 to 7 days is the standard window to safely return materials to their normal moisture levels. With all that industrial equipment running literally 24/7 for days on end, you're probably wondering about the disruption to your daily routine. Can you actually stay in the building? The practical answer really depends on the scope. If you have a minor, isolated leak in just one room, it's generally safe to stay, though you will have to put up with a lot of noise from commercial air movers and dehumidifiers. However, if you're dealing with Category 3 black water, like a sewage backup, or if the water has created major electrical hazards in the structure, it is entirely unsafe. For your own health and safety, those situations require immediate evacuation until the mitigation is fully complete. Now, we've talked a lot about sudden emergencies, but what about the silent threats? How do you actually spot water damage that's slowly, quietly hiding right behind your walls? The symptoms are physical, but man, they can be subtle. The absolute most common giveaway is a persistent musty odor. That's the smell of mold actively growing. But you also have to watch for the visual signs: peeling wallpaper, cupping or warped wood floors, sudden, unexplained spikes in your water bill. These are all massive red flags for a hidden leak. Finally, feel your drywall for soft spots and watch out for unusual condensation on your windows, which usually indicates abnormally high indoor humidity. So the crucial point here, and this is perfectly summarized by a simple truth from our sources, is this: water damage gets worse every hour you wait. Speed and professional scientifically backed mitigation are your only true defenses. Waiting around to see if it just dries on its own? Yeah, that is a gamble you will almost certainly lose. I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on regarding your own property. If you notice a tiny water stain on your ceiling, or maybe catch just a faint, musty odor today, what invisible threat is quietly multiplying behind your drywall right this very second? Seriously, don't wait to find out the hard way. Be proactive, inspect your property, and when in doubt, rely on the science of professional assessment. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and hey, stay dry out there.